It doesn't look like it, but this is a 2018 Honda CBR 1000RR, aka a Fireblade. And if you look really closely, you'll notice it's been crashed.
This model was launched in 2017 and it was revolutionary for Honda. It was their first superbike with a color TFT display, first superbike with a quick shifter and blipper for clutchless shifting, and their first superbike to boast lean-sensitive traction control combined with wheelie control and even adaptive engine braking.
Beyond that, it spits out 188 horsepower while being one of the most nimble sport bikes ever created. So I figured this one is worth saving. Plus, I got it for about 75% off, which means if I can rebuild it for less than the price of a used Fireblade, I'll get a modern superbike for cheap.
But judging by the bent forks, hole in the swing arm, and cracked subframe, to name just a few ailments, that's easier said than done.
Now, I've never done this before, but I think I'm up for the challenge. I mean, how hard could it be?
So today's mission is to show you the obvious damage, show you what didn't get damaged, start stripping the bike, and see if it's possible to get it running.
I've spent the last 4 days trying to figure out how this crash happened, and here are the two best scenarios I could come up with.
Unfortunately, this model may have brought a lot of updates when Honda released it, but it also came with a famous issue.
The updated 2017 model had gearbox issues. Issues that would sometimes result in false neutrals. That's when you get stuck between two gears, like third and fourth for example, and the rear wheel gets disconnected from the engine and feels like you're in neutral, hence the name false neutral.
This can be rather dangerous when you go for a downshift and get a false neutral instead. Suddenly, all the engine braking you were expecting to assist in your deceleration is gone.
And it's very possible that that is what happened to whoever was riding this bike when it crashed, because it appears to have rear-ended somebody, judging by all the damage up front here.
The left mirror is snapped off and gave someone 7 years of bad luck in the process. But somehow the glass from the right one survived.
Stock mirrors, about $185 when you consider the mirror and the cover. That's excluding the turn signal.
The right-hand intake duct is completely missing.
Intake duct, about $170 when you add up all the pieces. That's for each side.
The stay for the mirror, dash and headlight is both bent and cracked.
$178.
There's also no headlight in sight, and I suspect it did have one before the crash.
$1,200. But the other problem with rear-ending something is that your first point of contact is the front wheel. And apparently, all those forces are enough to bend your forks, like this.
The right one is a sorry sight, and even as a straight man, I can spot that it isn't straight. The left one isn't as severe, but the dust seal is popping out just slightly, which shows it also took a hit and is most likely damaged too.
New fork from Honda, $800 each. But that's not it. This bike also managed to go for a pretty long slide on its left-hand side during the crash, judging by this worn-down frame slider. But the question is, did this happen before or after the forks got bent? In my mind, rear-ending something brings you to a stop, so sliding after that shouldn't really be possible. Unless you were going fast on a highway, for example, rear-ended a car that was also moving, so although hitting a car slowed you down a bit and bent the forks, there was still enough momentum left to slide after the impact. Of course, the other option is that the guy fell off of this and it slid on its side into a wall front wheel first, and that is what bent the forks. I think it's less likely, but I'm not an expert accident analyst yet. The problem with sliding is that roads are rough, and sliding on rough surfaces wears through things, like the swing arm.
Apparently, this hole is normal in a swing arm, and this one isn't.
To be honest, I think it's still perfectly strong enough to ride, but obviously it needs to be fixed or replaced. But a new swing arm, $2,000.
In addition, the slide wore down the left foot peg, got rid of the gear lever's tip, and tried to hide the paddock stand spool from me.
The impact onto its left-hand side must also have been pretty hard, because the subframe is bent in the opposite direction. You can see that it doesn't line up with the rear wheel anymore.
The subframe is also cracked under here. The fairings are obviously destroyed. The rear seat is worn through. The passenger pegs are pretty scratched. The switchgear is also scratched, although all functional. The left clip-on handlebar is bent and the tail light is missing.
Subframe $800, fairings at least $1,000 for aftermarket options. Tail light $285, clip-on $200 each. Rear seat only $160. You get the idea. So obviously, if you were doing the calculations there, it's not feasible to replace all of that, especially not with brand new parts from Honda. It would cost more than the bike is worth. Hence, the insurance didn't want to fix it. So we're going to have to be a little bit creative. But there are quite a few areas I'm grateful for as well.
For starters, the front wheel itself looks fine, despite a bit of curb rash that I'm sure can be repaired. And the frame appears to be straight with no cracks.
Of course, things could change when I strip the bike and I can see things more clearly, but for now, I'm hopeful.
With bent forks, the front wheel could have been pushed back into the radiator, but fortunately, that appears fine as well. Somehow the dash is untouched, luckily because it's $1,300 to replace. And I have the key. So once I had charged the dead battery, the dash turns on and you can see the bike has 28,000 kilometers on it. I actually really like the dash layout and how it looks, and you can even change the background color to carbon fiber. Honda really do know the way to my heart. The engine looks perfectly fine and is holding all its fluids.
So that means there's a chance we can get it running today. This bike also still has a clean title, not a salvage title. So it'll be worth a lot more in the end than if it were to have a rebuilt title, which is one of the reasons I was happy to take a chance on it.
But the best news is that all the paint on this bike has paint protection film on it.
So I think as soon as I peel off all this PPF, the fairings will be perfectly fine underneath. The irony is that the previous owner paid to get the whole bike PPF'd, but then bought a fake SC Project exhaust.
You can see the resolution on the laser-etched logo is really low, and it is welded straight on rather than using traditional exhaust springs. So swapping this fake silencer out isn't even going to be easy.
I can also be grateful that the bike fell on its left-hand side so that the exhaust didn't get crushed at all. But maybe then I could have gotten a real SC Project, like on my R1.
Other than that, the brake calipers look good, the discs look good, the rear set brackets look good, the front seat just needs recovering, and even both levers look fine.
The best thing about Honda in this case is that they run plastic covers over the metal fuel tank. So hopefully all I need to replace are these plastic covers and not the expensive tank itself.
Whereas on my Yamaha, for example, the metal tank is fully exposed and would have been damaged in a crash like that.
I think the tail of the bike is going to be easier to fix because most of the pieces are here. The front end is going to be more difficult because I can't just find replacement parts for all the broken pieces. I also have to figure out what parts are missing entirely. But that is part of the fun and the challenge. I have no doubt there is going to be a lot more stuff that we find once we start to strip it and dig into it. But those are the basics that we need to sort out to get it back on the road.
Of course, I still have my 2016 Yamaha R1, the one that I bought as a track bike and turned back into a street bike, repairing some broken parts along the way. And that is still my dream bike. I've never been a massive fan of these Hondas since their gearbox issues, but I thoroughly enjoyed the process of working on my R1, and I've missed having a project.
I've always wanted to rebuild a crashed Superbike, but I've never been in the position to make it happen. But over the last few months, I've been keeping an eye out for crashed bikes. And the other morning, I stumbled over this. This is my first time ever bidding on a vehicle. This is something I've always wanted to try to do. I log on this morning. There's a Fireblade, a 2018 Fireblade for sale for about $2,000, my local currency. It was 20 minutes remaining on the bid, and you had to register and pay a deposit. I had to phone to get them to fast track my membership. You can see now I am active. I just placed my first bid with a minute to go, so then it gave us an extra 3 minutes on the clock. It's 2 minutes remaining, and then it could be mine. The cool part was that I was the only one bidding on it, so I thought I had it in the bag for $2,000. But what I didn't realize at the time was, first, that amount excluded VAT, and secondly, you have to get over the STC amount, which is apparently the value that the insurer wants for the vehicle, and my minimum bid didn't meet that. It's kind of awkward. I didn't plan on buying a 5-blade today, but I mean, why not? 2018 Superbike, newer than my R1, we can't go wrong. If I actually get this, then I'm gonna have to go look at it, because apparently then I have 24 hours to pay. So I'm not gonna pay if I don't want it. So a little bit cheeky, but hey, you gotta play by the rules, or play within the rules. 5, 4, 3, no one else seems to want it, so. It just kicked me out now. I think I won. Could I be the proud new owner of a Honda?
Nevertheless, I still went to look at the bike later that day, where they informed me that the STC value was $3,000. Still really cheap for a bike that goes for about 12 grand on the used market where I live. But upon viewing, there was a lot more damage than I expected.
So the bike was in this dark, dingy warehouse, barely bright enough to make out all the damage on the bike. I was even trying to use the torch on my phone. But because I had won the auction earlier that day, I then had 24 hours to decide if I wanted to pay what the insurer was asking for it or not. And as you can probably tell by now, the next day I decided to go ahead with it. So it's officially been an hour since I told them that I would in fact buy that motorcycle, and I'm already here looking for parts because I figured the sooner I can order parts, the better.
Without even having the bike and only a few bad videos to reference, I ended up at Honda on my Yamaha, because what better way to go and order parts. And the next day it was finally time to pick up my new bike, and I wasn't sure how to feel. It's sad seeing a beautiful bike in this state. It's exciting getting a new project, and I've never done this before, so I really have no idea if it's financially possible.
Just get really tight shots so it looks like I have a Raptor.
I relegated the R1 to make space for my new blade, and in all honesty, unloading was easier than it could have been, because it at least still rolls and both tires hold air, rendering my forklift license useless once again.
Lucky it's crashed already. Okay, so that's the bike. That's what is damaged and what isn't damaged. But I'm itching to see if it will run, because there's no obvious reason that it shouldn't. And if it doesn't, then this is an entirely different project. But first, there's something that's been bothering me even more.
Yes, it's ridiculous to be concerned about dirt when the bike looks like this, but it's been sitting for a long time and looks like someone oiled the chain with motor oil or something similar. It's even dripping down the kickstand. I made sure to tape off the now very exposed hole into the airbox, and even just a quick rinse and chain scrub made a big difference. Although it would have been a lot easier if I could have used a paddock stand, but I'm still playing hide and seek with that spool. I've also been dying to remove its stock number. What a rude way to identify a bike. They have names and feelings too, you know. Luckily, gasoline got it off because rubbing alcohol was useless. In hindsight, that was probably just me procrastinating, so I decided to check its fluids to see if it would run. The oil was very full, and I couldn't see the coolant level, although it was damp. And finally, I gave it a drop of fuel.
This might not be the best idea. It has oil, the oil looks clean, but the level is too full. The manual says you should run the bike for 3 to 5 minutes before checking it, but I struggle to believe that the level would change that much by doing so. I also can't see the coolant level, but I think it does have it. We shouldn't need it. I don't know how old the fuel is, so what I'm going to try to do is turn it on and just crank it to see if it turns over. I'm also paranoid. There could be oil in a cylinder from the crash that'll hydrolock it. Probably just paranoia. I don't know how feasible that actually is, so we're going to be careful.
So first, I just quickly bumped the starter button. But then I went to hold it down for real.
That's not happy. It doesn't sound like a dead battery. It sounds like it doesn't want to turn over.
Unsure what to do, I decided to turn it off and on again because that always works for iPhones. But once again, it made the same noise and didn't want to turn over. but I was too scared to keep holding the button down.
I think the next step will be to get to the spark plugs at a later stage. I'm not gonna lie, that did scare me, but I don't want to read into it too much just yet, but I'm not gonna keep trying in case I do damage something properly. But now for the fun part. I want to at least start to strip the bike. Get rid of some of these dangling fairings, the seats, the mirrors, maybe the tail tidy, anything relatively easy to remove so that I can see if there's any more obvious damage underneath that so I can go and order more parts. But I'm only gonna get to the bigger parts like the bent forks and the swing arm in the next video.
The easiest removal was the rider's seat because the bolt holes don't even line up with the bent subframe anymore. The rear seat was just as easy, even if the keyholes also don't quite line up anymore. Next, I loosened the two 10mm nuts holding on what was left of the mirror, as well as two connectors, and off the carnage came. I was a little more gentle with the right one since I can save some parts of it. Then there was just one bolt holding the front fairing and windscreen onto the mirror stay, but to be fair, the other bolt was still doing its job. I also bravely removed the stinky reservoir sock. The side fairing was also held on by just one remaining bolt, making my life easier. And then I moved on to the side tank covers, which have the Honda badges that we'll probably reuse on new fairings. That was just for fun though, they looked hideous. And since the two rear bolt holes had snapped off in the crash, the tank cover just effortlessly slid off to reveal our undamaged fuel tank. In true Honda fashion, the mudguard has 6 bolts to hold it on, and for some reason, these reflectors have never been removed. Well, they're not going back on now. I moved on to the tail, where the 1 bolt remaining theme continued, and now you can see just how skewed the subframe actually is in relation to the front of the bike. The mangled tail tidy bolts were challenging to get to with all the bent metal, and after disconnecting the indicators, I'm hoping to never see it again. The rear seat locking plate doesn't look bent, but looks can be deceiving. And 2 screws later, another broken dangling piece disappeared. I also removed the seat strap since it was easily accessible, and everything will have to be removed from the subframe at some point in time, followed by the belly pan that besides a few snapped bolt holes is in good shape. And now I can at least see the full exhaust and access the drain bolt easier. I really wasn't in the mood to remove these frame sliders just yet, but luckily this plastic cuts like butter. I then spun the naked bike around so that we can admire these carefully crafted wings someone thought looked nice. Maybe it was all this downforce that caused the crash. And since the only thing holding this fairing on was the frame slider, I got my butter knife out once again. Finally, I removed these reusable zip ties that surely can't be OEM, and pulled out this intake duct too, so the bike can be symmetrical and will please my OCD.
What I did learn from my R1 project is that you should never throw away stuff like this. It might look like broken rubbish, but I guarantee you there are small parts like rubber grommets, threaded clips and other small things that you don't even know you need now, but you will really miss in a few weeks' time when you're trying to put it back together. Well, there you have it. I'm the proud new owner of a 2018 Fireblade that doesn't start, has a skew subframe, a damaged swing arm and bent forks, amongst other damage.
But besides that, we also made some progress. I mean, a mess.
But at least the bike is now naked, so in the next video we can get on with it and maybe even diagnose those engine issues. But don't forget to watch this video 7 times so I can now afford to fix this bike, and I'll see you on the next ride.